Welcome to the Academy of Esports podcast. I'm James O'Hagan, and I am so excited to be here today, sitting down to have a conversation with Latoya Peterson. She lives at the intersection of emerging technology, video games, television, and music. She has been named one of Forbes Magazine's 30 under 30 rising stars in media, and she is best known for the award-winning blog, Racialicious. I love that. Racialicious.com. Love it. The intersection of race and pop culture. She is currently the deputy editor, digital innovation for ESPN's The Undefeated.
Formerly.
Oh, sorry.
Formerly. So I have actually left that company.
Oh.
I'm no longer at ESPN.
So Latoya's on her own.
Yes, I am.
She was the deputy editor at ESPN for The Undefeated. In 2016, she produced a critically acclaimed YouTube series on girl gamers. And previously, she was editor-at-large at Fusion and the senior digital producer for The Stream, a social media-driven news show on Al Jazeera America. Now, currently, I know, because I follow you on Twitter especially, you're doing a lot of work with regards to virtual reality and augmented reality. Is that correct?
Right. I actually just launched a game studio called Glow Up Games with my two friends.
Yeah, talk about that real quickly.
Oh, yeah, that's great. So we're an all women of color studio that formed. Basically, we're all friends for a long time. We've been in different parts of the industry. And then we decided, I guess, to combine our powers and try to create the future of entertainment. And that, allows us to play in a lot of different worlds. So AR, VR, AI and ML, which I started training under. And that's what Mitsu's specialty is. Her last startup was at Spirit AI, so she was doing a lot of stuff with that. And procedural narrative, particularly in video games. So we've got some projects, some cool stuff that'll be coming out hopefully in 2020.
Excellent. Well, I'm very excited to learn about that. So that's a perfect segue because I know that you're often asked to speak about technology and race and gender and pop culture. And my hope is today that we get to touch a little bit on all those. And maybe your previous work kind of ties into this because you wrote a brilliant, in my mind, it is a core, brilliant article about the state of a racial divide, I guess, in this country based around gaming culture, which to me was something in education. We talk about the digital divide all the time, which is barriers to socioeconomics. But I never thought of race as having an issue in esports. But first, let me ask you this. How did you become interested in esports culture?
Yeah, it's a funny one. So I actually was super not interested in esports. Like I'm a gamer, old school gamer, console gamer at that. So again,
what's your game?
Which genre, honey? I like fighters, RPGs. I've been playing for 30 something years.
Yeah.
You gotta get specific. I mean, you're talking about like all time. We're talking about favorites. Talking about by console.
Well, like my favorite game all time, Galaga. Like if I see it and I've got quarters in my pocket, I'm gonna sit down and play.
Classic arcader. I love it. Okay, so let's see. For me, things I cannot resist. Eternal Darkness was a really, really influential game for me, which I love. The whole Final Fantasy series, but particularly 9 through 10-2.
Not 7?
So I did not own a PlayStation before 7. So we talk about like socio and economic divides, right? I did not own a PlayStation. I got to see all the ads, get jealous, stuff like that, but I never acted 7.
Okay.
Didn't get access to a PlayStation until 8. And so, at some point I will go back and play this remaster because clearly that is like the legend of the series and we must do it.
It is.
So Final Fantasy, in terms of fighters, Tekken is my favorite of all time. It's a game that I just love and love and love and love. And then Smash Brothers also has a special place in my heart. So
awesome.
There's a lot of different things. Recent new fave, Persona 5. I'm so obsessed with that freaking game. Now I'm playing like the dancing, offshoot dancing. Like now I'm like obsessed. My kid's obsessed. It's nuts. Our house has gone all Persona.
Well, so and my current one, I guess, that I'm playing heavily is Magic the Gathering Arena. It's
yes, my friends keep trying to get me to Magic. They're like, we're going to drag you. You don't know. It's coming. It's going to happen.
And I've bought the cards now, and I find myself just playing the online version more than actually playing the card version. So, but yeah, how did you get in? We kind of diverged, but how did you get interested in the esports culture? What was the thing that got you into it?
So a few years ago, I was hate tweeting a gaming book on a plane. I was like reading this book that I was like, this is terrible. Like, why? There's a thing around like video game history. Same thing happened in hip hop history where like there's one person writing it and like whatever their perspective is, that's what you get. And so I was reading the Grand Theft Auto story and there was some really gross like gender-based stuff in there. So I was hate tweeting it on a plane and I got a pop into my DMs from an editor I know, Megan Greenwell, who at the time was at ESPN The Mag. And she goes, hey, you play video games? And I'm like, yes. I do. I talk about it sometimes, but at the time I was more of like a journalist that plays video games as opposed to a gaming journalist.
Okay.
So yeah, So I was like, yeah, of course I play. I've been playing forever. And they were like, how about you write something for the esports issue? And I was like, what is the esport? So we started there, and they were like, no, we just want like a female perspective. It's like very male heavy, like whatever. So I wrote this piece all about like what it felt like to be a woman growing up in gaming culture and like whatever. They published it in the mag. It was great. Read other stuff. I was like, oh, this esports thing is big. Didn't think I was actually going to end up working at ESPN, and there was a weird twist of fate that led me there. So I thought I was going to go work at the Washington Post, and then my former boss, Kevin Merida, ended up being poached by ESPN, and then he like called me 6 months later. It was like, oh, it's the same job, just come over here.
Wow.
So I was like, all right. So I got to ESPN, and day 2, couldn't like log into my laptop or anything. But a guy named Dan Kaufman called me. He's like, hey, do you know where the other gamers are? Because we all want to talk. We all want to meet you. Because they had read the piece in the magazine. Mm-hmm. And so right when I got there, like the first friends I made at ESPN were all gamers, and they were all working on esports in some way, even if they weren't officially assigned to the team. And then what's what I found out at ESPN, like if you know anything about video games, you like video games, you get drafted to esports. There's no conversation about it. You're in it. Like all hands on deck. We're going to help this out. We're going to make it work. So that was a very fun 3 years of like side pieces. I had my other like real job.
Gotcha.
And then I would spend some time with the esports team, like going to Evo and like figuring out this new landscape and like explaining the difference. Like, no, FIFA is not quite there, but League of Legends is. And like, so there was Counter-Strike, but this is less popular than this. And like, it just became a whole thing. Then Fortnite blew it all up. So it was an interesting kind of front row seat to like how the esports economy was emerging and what kind of considerations were starting to play.
Well, so you obviously are looking at this as a woman of color, and through the lens of a female in a very male, white, Asian-dominated culture. In your mind, what is the current state of diversity, or more of equity, of esports in the United States? I mean, I guess that's a two-part question. I mean, one is diversity, and one is of equity.
Yeah, I would say there's no such thing as equity right now in esports. Just throw that out the door.
Really?
Like, there isn't that level of understanding, investment, and equality that would have to happen before those conversations go. And to remember too, like esports is still very much like the Wild West. Like it's still not defined extremely well. So it was funny. I used to joke like, oh, the executives don't understand esports, but also esports doesn't understand esports all the way. Like, what makes a spectatable game? How many games have failed trying to launch esports that couldn't find an audience? Like, there's not a proven formula yet for how this works. If you open up a soccer team, it's a soccer team, right? And the question is like, do you have an audience or not? With an esports thing, like there's 8 million things of whether or not your game is spectatable and whether or not you'll gain an audience. So like that's the first issue. And there's all the other stuff that hasn't been worked out yet in terms of like just general rules, gambling, betting. Can you own multiple teams in the same sport? Like there's all these things that are taken for granted in the sports world that don't exist yet in esports. To add on top of that, that's when you start getting into these questions of like, what does representation look like? What does equality of access look like? And a lot of the questions we ask about esports are questions we ask about kind of our broader digital space in general, right? Does everyone have access to the same types of materials? Does everybody have access to the same types of spaces, gear, equipment, opportunity? So I would say equity is a question that we're going to be looking at like 5-10 years down the road.
So you're not even starting that question yet.
No, we're not even close to that.
Wow.
We're not even there. The reason I started even asking any questions, like you're reporting on these events, I'm like standing there and like, I didn't expect there to be that many women. It's just what it is. Right, I know Tia Taylor really well. We've been hanging online for a decade, and Roulette from the Frag Dolls. Like, so we've been talking for ages. Like, you just know what it is, right? You're a woman in the gaming space. You know what this is. But I started looking around, and I'm like, I know for a fact. I grew up in these entire like communities of Black gamers. Where are we?
Yeah.
So literally, it was a personal interest question. What happened? Like esports is the new hotness. They're throwing all this money. These kids have teams. It's not that Black kids aren't playing video games. Where are we in the professional space? And so I was like, okay, so, as I'm reporting, I started like digging into it. And I started reporting to like the Undefeated, I should be specific, which is the unit I worked on for ESPN, is about the intersection of race, sports, and culture.
Okay.
So I had a latitude to explore this question, right? ESPN in general, like their esports philosophy that my good friend Ryan Garfat runs now. But their esports philosophy is very much like just the news. Like they report it the same way you would do sports broadcasting, and they're kind of leaving the commentary out right now, just because, like I said, there's so many different factors. And sometimes it even makes it worse. So like putting a spotlight on female players when they're the first ones makes it worse for them. And so there's all of these questions too, like journalistically, like, okay, how do we want to cover or or attack these type of topics. And then the folks who are most interested in esports, a lot of times they're not from this background, so they don't ask the question. So to me, it was a very obvious, like, okay, where are we? Right.
Well, and it's interesting that you say we're not even at the point where we can start talking about equity in esports, and yet you had a magazine devoted to race, culture, and gaming.
Oh, well, so that was a site. That was a digital site.
Right.
The esports issue of ESPN, the magazine, was more like general.
That's what I meant. When I said magazine, I meant the Undefeated. I'm sorry. Yeah.
The Undefeated was not, like, look, let's just be clear. The Undefeated is not doing esports. That's like me, Mark Spears, and Dominique Foxworth being like, we like video games. We're going to report on this.
Gotcha.
Sure. Sounds like an interesting thing. I mean, like, so I pitched a piece on Echo Fox, which is now having its own, like, whole other set of controversy. But this was back when, like, they were trying to be taken seriously as a team. They had just reorganized, and this was the year they took 2 events at Evo. And so we, did a whole package on them, because there aren't that many like African Americans that are funding esports, that are really behind the scenes in it. We wanted to get deep into like the business of it. Like, what does it take to like launch an esports team to have these things? And then you had a star power like Rick Fox,
right,
who's like the face of this that helps draw investment in a way that the other teams did not. So there was an easy hook for us to get into it, stuff like that. So that's what I was doing. But over time, you start going, okay, why aren't there more Sonic Foxes? Why aren't there more F-Rumus? What's going on in this ecosystem where, esports is definitely just a hard space in general. I think they said something like the average career for a player is like 18 months. That is brutal, right?
That's shorter than the NFL.
Much shorter.
Yeah.
Like, average year in the NFL, I think, is 3 to 4 years.
Right.
So esports is 18 months to be a pro. And I mean, there's other stuff too, like esports has an informal economy in a way that other sports do not. So like this whole idea of like you can go to tourneys that are self-organized and win a little bit of money, like start playing there before you go to the pros. But like there's just so much that's just like this big, vague gray area. It's really its own ecosystem, its own upstart, its own language, its own culture. So understanding all those things is already difficult enough. And then you want to add in this extra layer of, okay, so why are some excluded, particularly when there's a very big investment in gaming to say everything's a meritocracy. It's just how well you play. And everything's just about how well you play. And the silent assumption is, well, if there's no black people here, it's because black people don't play as well. They're not as good. This is what it is. So when I sat down to like write that article, like that is not the usual article that would be published on an ESPN.
Right.
Esports. It was also like the style, just from like as a professional writer, like style wise, that was totally off. Like I was being a super geek and like putting in all this like academic research. I think the thing was like 7 pages, and I was like, y'all aren't going to do anything with this. I'm just going to write down my thoughts, and at some point maybe we'll do something with it. And they were like, now we're going to publish. Like we think this is good. We all want to know the same.
Wow.
We all have the same questions, and nobody knows anything about esports. So let's try to figure this out. So that's how that got started. And again, as just observing, watching, I'm a lot looser in the space now that I've left ESPN. I'm not like in that constant swirl of like pitching stuff and like talking to different people and, being on calls with the esports team anymore. But I do keep an eye out.
So what you're saying is the current state of diversity is pretty bleak, it sounds like.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be. Like the FGC is a really, really interesting anomaly, right? Like it's a hyper diverse space. Again, like not very gender diverse. Very few women in the FGC. And again, like there's all these statistical outliers that to me are fascinating. Like the journalist to me goes, this is a story. So like when we were at Evo, Ryan came flying down the hallway. We were like recording, doing all this stuff. And he goes, I saw a black woman in a Catwoman suit. She's playing Injustice. And we're like, okay, we got to go track her down, get her on camera, get her out. So like we're all like fanning the place. Like, who is she? Where is she? And so we're asking all the players that we're interviewing. I mean, like standard esports players, people I think Hungrybox was working with us that year, like different folks. And I was just asking them, like, how did you get in? Who do you play with? What's going on? A lot of folks say the arcades or, local clubs, stuff like that. And I thought it was interesting that the only woman that was competing competitively, in that round was playing by herself. She came up just practicing on the console herself and did not have a community, did not have a broader space. And I'm like, ooh, that's an interesting data point. What does that mean? Is that common? Is that why we see less women players? Is that the way to get more women players because they're isolated from the overall community? And like when I was reporting on the NBA 2K League, the first one, the first ever draft, no woman made the cut. This year, the first did. All right. And then I got a bunch of pitches of people going like, Latoya, cover this. I'm gone. Sorry. But I was like, talk to the regular esports team. But yeah, so like, but I talked to Hazel, who was the woman who made it the closest. She made it into the final rounds, into the interview portion. And when I talked to Hazel, like it was interesting, like how isolated women tend to be as players. And it's also because like some of that is just straight self-preservation, like you just don't want to deal with it. And some of it is like, well, we're just trying to find our own like tribe of like people who are like us, and if we can't, we'll just play by ourselves. But it takes a lot more courage and like amp to like play by yourself and then go to compete and try to like be in a space where other people are talking and competing and doing different types of stuff. So I just find that really interesting. Like that's a through line of a thing that might get investigated by me later, or hopefully somebody else will pick up, in terms of like how do women get into these spaces versus how do men. In terms of from a racial background, right? Like when I talked about Betsy's play practices, so Betsy Desalvo is a researcher at Georgia Tech, and I've been following her work for 10 years.
Oh, and I just started digging into her stuff too, and I'm gonna put some links in the podcast notes to her stuff, because her stuff is very interesting.
And again, it's such a small sample. It's 31 kids. Like you can't make big broad adjustments. That's the big thing I was trying to get at in the paper. Like it's hard when you're writing something that's like academic writing is normally really, really dense for specialized audiences. And there's a lot of caveats in it. They're like, okay, this was only tested under this circumstance with this, so that people know kind of what the information is. And when you go write for like a pop market, you have to condense some of those things so people can kind of like misinterpret. So I'm not saying like, oh, definitively like Betsy's research is the alpha and omega of all things Black in gaming. No. But she's one of the few people that's ever even tried to look into this. Mm-hmm. Look at the relationships between like computing and professionalism and play practices. And so I've been following her research since I met her back in 2010. We both were presenting at this conference on race and new media. And she was hyped to meet me. She was like, a Black woman who games. Oh my God, let's talk. I was like, of course. Her research is mostly on men, remember. So she didn't actually do one on women. So most of her research can't be extrapolated out in that same way. But there's some kind of notes of commonality that you see between her research and what's going on in esports. Mm-hmm. And I just thought like it was interesting just to bring that out in terms of even down to like playing more for console and being more console based and console focused versus playing for PC, which is what like the pipeline is for esports, mm-hmm. right? If you're a PC gamer, you're more likely to be more exposed to the esports scene, to know that it's like a professional thing that you could be doing. There's a lot less chances for people who play console-based games to get in. Overwatch is an exception. NBA 2K is an exception. And NBA 2K, I think I hinted at it because it wasn't finished yet in the piece I wrote. But what they ended up doing was that, so NBA 2K plays PC. Mm-hmm. For legacy reasons, like anything pro is going to be on PC. They just made sure that there's adapters available so that the players can play whatever control is comfortable, Xbox, PS4, keyboard, whatever's the most comfortable thing for them. There's now an adaptation, so that's how they compete and that's how they perform. Right. But you saw NBA 2K's draft is super diverse and a completely different looking. All of the rosters look totally different than any other esports team. Yeah. And I mean, there's also like it's almost also too like that's apples and oranges because like again, NBA 2K came out funded by the NBA, all right, in partnership with the NBA, with a starting salary, like all this stuff was done. Whereas like if you're competing to be on like one of the major esports teams, like a Team Liquid or like Exofox or somebody else, if you're competing there, you've come up through a different type of scene. There's a different type of tryout type of process, and you're normally in competition actively with other types of players. Mm-hmm. And then normally they spin out and become like personalities, which again is a whole other conversation. Even like esports personalities, like the kids who get big playing and streaming and doing stuff, like what types of numbers are they able to get depending on what they're playing and who their audience is perceived to be. I mean, there's a lot of different places that this research needs to go. It's just everything's too new at the moment. Well,
and the NBA's demographic of people who are watching is going to be a much more diverse one. That means there's going to be a lot of diversity, I guess, in the game's players too, right? Already?
Ways. But I mean, there's a lot of diversity in a lot of these other games too, like Overwatch is a very diverse scene. Smash is a super diverse scene. Yes. So some of these things are, some of these things are a little bit more cultural, when you say. I think also, like I said, to me, NBA 2K makes total sense because of the broad player base that was there, right? League of Legends is a huge, huge global player base. Huge, right? Mm-hmm. But it's PC. Right. And who is going to be really, really good on PC? There's also like PC culture is also in a very different kind of more hyper competitive space, in a way that like the FGC is very competitive, but in a different kind of way, right? It's just the cultures themselves are very, very different. And so I thought it was interesting. That's why in my article I tried to look at like different types of scenes. So like there's the FGC, but I also talked about Terrence M and his experience playing Hearthstone. I also talked about like some of the other players that we could see playing other types of games. And it's just like, there's a lot of through lines that are still happening, even if you can search for all the differences, right?
Well, let's look at NBA 2K a little closer here. So for the audience who's listening, again, we're talking about educators who may not know exactly what that is. NBA 2K is basically basketball, computerized basketball. Okay. And they use NBA rosters and the current rosters. I own a copy of it. I'm terrible. And so it started to shift esports culture a little bit. Has it, or has it created further divisions even? I mean, are we starting to see some even, one of the big conversation pieces, I just came away from the ISTE conference, was the question became, do we need to have separate games, separate leagues for girls to get girls involved in esports? And by and large, everybody pretty much said no. I mean, the people, there's people who have been in the, I see you throwing your hands up.
Yeah, I mean, there's arguments for and against in my book.
Okay.
For and against.
But so are we creating, I guess this is, I didn't think we were going to come away with solutions to all this today, but is the NBA 2K League, because it is so hyper-focused on trying to create a diverse culture, is it almost separating itself out where it becomes a division, I guess?
Yeah, well, NBA 2K isn't classically part of that esports club anyway. Right. So that one makes it a little bit, again, so like if you look at the article when I talk about, PC Master Race and console peasants, which has some weird racial implications.
Wait a minute, let's make sure everybody hears that term right.
That's terrible.
PC Master Race and console peasants.
I had to break that all the way down, especially because everybody's like, what? Anybody who's not a gamer is like, what are you talking about, Latoya?
Right.
And so these are like memes and jokes that go around on forums. There's a lot of trash talk in gaming. There's a level of trash talk that's considered like acceptable, right? And that's like normal. It just comes with the territory of like just trash talking your friends, same way you would over like basketball or fantasy or whatever, all right? So there's a normal level of that, and then there's also the stuff that starts to get really tinged. Really racially tinged, really gender tinged, and there's stuff that's like outright harassment, right? So I try to cover all of those things in the article. The PC Master Race part is one because there was a subset of gaming where there used to be like PC wars and console wars, right? And the PC players were like, oh no, our stuff is superior. We have superior graphics, superior response time, we're superior everything. So therefore, PC Master Race, right? The console peasants was a dig at, oh, you guys have these low performing old systems, anybody can have them. No, you don't need any kind of like technological prowess to like work these things. Peasants, people, the unwashed masses, you could also see it as, because more people had consoles at the time than gaming PCs. That starts to shift a little bit, and again, that'll have interesting implications for the future of esports of how much that shifts. If every kid could have a quality gaming PC and it's equal, or if the most platform agnostic way to play is the PC. It'll change the landscape. Right now, consoles are dominant.
Well, and we talk about, you talk about the agnostics of the platform. Fortnite has and Minecraft have started to really shift that. I mean, it used to be that you had to be on the same console or the same, you had to have the same operating system in order to play. And Fortnite has pretty much said, doesn't matter if you're on your phone, tablet, if you're on a PC, if you're on an Xbox, doesn't matter, Switch, we will put you all together in the same play space and play. When I first got really into Overwatch, I was excited because I had a copy for my Xbox and I had a copy for my PC at home, and I thought the idea of my kids being able to play, and they can't. We have to go to the gaming lounge in order for them to all play together. We can't just have one on the PC and one on the Xbox. Is there going to be where like everybody is so particular about their keyboard and their mouse? Is it going to be the console or the PC is also going to potentially be a choice of the gamer?
Yeah, I think it depends, right? So like, you brought up a great example of Fortnite where it's like they made it so it doesn't matter, right?
Right.
Play on most, do whatever you want. However you want to play our game, come play. And some of these divisions will go away if more companies just kind of open. Like consoles are closed boxes, right? So in some ways, like the PC people, they have a point, right? It's like it's a little bit easier to get access to because you're not limited to a certain box over another box, right? And if you pop open your box as a PC, you're supposed to. Pop open a console, you voided your warranty. Like these are, you're not supposed to mod certain things.
Right.
I mean, there's reasons for each of these things, right? But it's more how these cultures evolved and then like what they feed on. And that's part. So we always talk about toxicity in gaming, right? And I tend to be very careful talking about it because one, like, just gamers get a really bad rap in general when I'm like, look, there's toxicity in every industry I've been in. So like, Me Too didn't start with gaming, honey. Like, shaming, women in tech, like this did not, you cannot blame gamers for all of the shit that has happened, right? That is not a thing that goes on. So, back to that. So like, the educator's perspective, I think, is really key here because you're going, okay, we want to put people into a space. We want it to be safe. We want it to be as safe as we can kind of make it. And that people aren't going to be like unjustly persecuted for stepping in space, which will happen, absolutely happens. And there is a culture of accepted trash talk that is unacceptable, right? So to the point where, like, I think I've linked in the article to like white players calling other white players the N-word or the F-word because they're upset and they lost, and some of them have lost their contracts over it, right? And again, this was like racially motivated in that way, right? These are white players to white players. But to them, it's like, oh, I'm going to say the most offensive, horrifying thing that I can do. And that's accepted in our culture. And what do you mean it's wrong now that I'm professionalized? And again, this is part of the whole, like, what is esports going to be? Esports has been this feral subculture that's running around. People are like, oh, this is kind of worth billions of dollars. What should we? Oh! But somebody else reminded me, sports leagues went through the same thing. Like, I didn't know Manchester United had this horrible, like, racism problem in the 70s. And they had to basically, like, throw the club out and start over to get it to the point it was today. And I was like, I had no idea, because they were talking about what? Women in artificial intelligence. So again, like,
oh, jeez,
these are across industries. But to go back to your earlier point, and I think this might help illuminate it, the whole idea of, should we separate out women or should we separate out girls and have girls separate leagues? Two minds on that. It's hard because I've looked at the research, I've looked at quite a bit of stuff. I've seen some really beautiful things happen when you do create a safer space. And it doesn't mean safe, right? Internal divisions in women's groups, women's only groups. Like, this is not, bullying is not a specific to gaming thing. It's just targeted so efficiently and effectively at women in gaming. It's been weaponized in a way that bullying doesn't become, to the point where it robs women of like careers as announcers, as industry professionals, as coaches, because that vitriol becomes so terrible that they don't want to deal with it anymore. And so, like, that is a very real issue that's currently happening, where women can be chased out of the industry just because they caught the wrong level of attention.
Well, Gamergate. I mean, if you're an educator who doesn't know what Gamergate is, just do a quick search and you'll find out exactly what that story is and how impactful that was on one person and on the industry as a whole.
I mean, there were many people. Zoe Quinn, I did her book for NPR, which was interesting, and then Gamergate was like, come debate us on Kotaku in action, which is fine. Like, it's an interesting way people are perceiving what they're doing versus like what the effects are.
Oh, you froze for a second. Okay.
Yeah. Cool.
All right.
There were women who were, never written about, who were caught in the undertow of that, right? Just because they were women in gaming, or because like one of my friends was running a thing called Code Liberation, which was a free school to teach women about gaming and to get women into games, taught them C++, stuff like that, to start in the industry. And they've had some high-profile alums. It's all totally free. It's a really cool program. Somebody was like, we're going to be anti-Gamergate, so we're going to do a drive and donate this money to Code Liberation, and they were catching a bunch of stuff off of it. I mean, and that's before you get to like the patient zeros of Gamergate, people who were targeted before it had a name or before it was an organized like movement. So I mean, like, again, too much research that is undone in this space. That said, I think that if you look at, there's textbooks like Beyond Barbie, Mortal Kombat. There's textbooks that talk specifically about gender and gaming. And so you do actually see some effects when you remove women from an environment where men are dominant, right? And a few different reasons. Number one, like, there's this whole passive controller thing they talk about beautifully in Beyond Barbie, Mortal Kombat. There's multiple researchers. My favorite is Holden Lynn's piece that was from the second book. There's a third one now, I think, and now a diversifying one. So I think there's 4 total. And they're all textbooks. I think MIT Press publishes them. But, they talk about how, like, women are kind of trained, girls particularly from an early age, that if a boy wants to play, to give up the controller. And so you'll see that even, like, when I'm in arcades sometimes, I'll like go hang out with my friends. We'll be in an arcade because we're old and we like to drink and play arcade games. I suck at them for various reasons. Talk about I was the arcade girlfriend, and that's a whole other genre of women in gaming, which is the girlfriend slot. That is all you're supposed to be doing. But I noticed like a young girl who's hanging out with 2 young men. They're all African American, and she wasn't playing. She was watching them play, go on to things. So I made sure I went up to her and gave her a fistful of quarters. Like, go ahead, honey. It's on me. Like, play. Because we all have been there. Like, if you're a woman in gaming, you've been there. You know what this feels like. And there's, if you're trying to like fight for space and you're not quite as good, or you are as good, but you kind of don't want to like deal with that, or these are guys you don't know, you tend to hand back a little bit. You don't. And there's also this reinforcement. Holden Lynn's piece is one that I love, where she talks about kind of like this almost like subconscious discouragement of women in gaming from the time that you're younger, from like, should you really be playing all the time computer games and not like spending it with your friends or like helping us to clean up or things like that, in the way that men don't get that same level of discouragement. They get some, which is like, don't rot your brain out playing video games, go do something else. But it's not like a gender, like, there's better things you'd be doing with your time, like learning to basically be a young woman.
Well, to paraphrase a person I had a conversation with yesterday, they actually taught at an all-girls school. I believe it was an all-girls school. And he said to them, we wanted to start an esports club here at the school. And the girls were kind of a little bit taken aback. And they said, how are we going to do that? We don't have any boys in the school.
Oh.
I mean, and I went, that's sad.
Self-perception is a hell of a thing. I mean, like, for me, I've always identified as a gamer. All the other people I played were like women or my cousins. Like, I never thought it was weird until I got older and they were like, girls don't play. What are you talking about?
But we're talking about...
Yeah.
We're talking about 97% of boys 13 to 17 identify on some level of being a gamer. And people go, wow, that's really high. I go, and it's 83% of girls also identify at some level of being a gamer, right? So that it's there. It's there. It's also
public performance. Again, goes back to Betsy's research, stuff like that. Who are you publicly? So like one of the things we're doing at my new company is like we need to also conquer this whole idea of like the word gamer and like what does that mean for people, and also the word casual, which is, it's not describing people's play practices at all. And it's like, it's shorthand in the industry. So if you talk to a lot of women, and like we've been doing even just like play testing on our new games and talking to women, and they're like, I'm not really a gamer. And then you talk to them for 5 more minutes and they're like, yeah, but I spent I've been playing Game of Thrones Conquest for the last 51 days, and I spent $800, and I'm too embarrassed to tell my girlfriend that I spent $800 in this game. So, but I have to make sure that I have the stuff like this, because I need to go ahead and like master this raid. And you're like, that is intense. This is not a casual gamer.
Right.
That is what she would be categorized at. This is not a casual gamer. So like we're looking at, there's so many women I talk to, they're like, I'm not a gamer, but favorite story from ESPN. So I write for the Esports Magazine. I come into the company, all my bros. Hey, Latoya, what's up? You're a gamer. Let's talk. Da-da-da-da. Great crew. Hanging out. About 5 months into me hanging out with these guys, start talking to all these women, art department, stuff like that. Yeah, I'm a gamer. I love it. I love BioShock. I love Mass Effect. I love this. Oh my God. Yeah, I made this Mario thing. Oh, are you doing an NBA Jam thing, Latoya? Put me on that so I can make sure I'm gonna size your graphics. And I'm like, okay, awesome. Do you know these guys? And they were like, yeah, I tried to tell them that we game, and they were like, yeah, whatever. They didn't take me seriously, so I just didn't say anything. So it's this weird thing, like me being very open about my identity. A lot of women were like, oh yeah, by the way, I love to play pop, 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 pop. Suddenly it's like 15 games in later, and you're like, yo, you are serious, right?
My hope.
But the mental image is not there, right? The mental image is, I'm not a gamer. I just like these 28 games, right? Which I thought was really, really interesting. The other thing you should look at too is Smash Sisters. So Smash Sisters is Lily Chen and Emily, I think is her partner. Lily is Milk Tea on Twitter. And they run an all-female Smash tournament.
Okay.
Because, again, like the scene is very male-dominated. It can be very intimidating to get into. So they just run a fun little, like there's no film, no cameras. Everybody shows up. I think Lil had said because of parent safety concerns, because they allow like all ages to come. So she was like, there's a 9-year-old that's nice with Bowser, like comes in and dominates with her parents, right? And then she goes home and like they think it's safe because like no one on the internet can target her, nobody can come after them, nobody can see their faces, and it's able to be free and like make some mistakes and have fun. And so I think when you look at something like Smash Sisters, there is an argument for creating a space where it's like, just come play, and it doesn't matter what your experiences level is, and just, get yourself comfortable with it in a place that has low stakes. Whereas there's a really cool concept in the FGC. My friend Pat writes about this beautifully, Pat Miller, and he called it like taking the salt, right? And this idea of like you have to suck in order to get better. Like you have to.
Yeah.
Some point, you will just be creamed, right? Tom Cannon tells a similar story. We talked about like being the fish, like you're the one feeding all the quarters and then somebody's just like taking your money and riding right the rest of the time. And that is an accepted, like that level of failure is like you cannot be good if you didn't take some L's. And like there's a perfectionist tendency that we tend to push on girls in particular. That's like, don't do this unless you're already good. Don't do this, you're already there. And that is doubled down in gaming culture, where it's like, oh, don't even step to these sticks unless you're going to be doing something. Like, if I'm not impressed, like there's automatically a skepticism. You're like, oh, you're a girl who plays video games? Cute. Playing Candy Crush? And you're like, oh, okay.
I feel like I've done a good job as a dad, because my girls, they play Overwatch, and they tell their little brother what to do. I mean, he loves to play too, but yeah, the girls are. I love watching them play. I love it because they don't care. They're just going to step in, and they'll take their lumps, and they do it, and then they just walk away. They're just like, when they lose, they're like, okay, and when they win, they're like, okay. It's like almost the exact same thing. So I feel like I've done something right as a dad, at least by giving them perspective.
Good job.
Right.
Sometimes you take the L, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And learning what that feels like, and then like being able to feel confident. So I feel like girls that are growing up now can feel a lot more confident in their identities. It's like a lot less weird than it used to be. It's a lot less strange than it used to be. But also gamers were a community at some point.
Yeah.
This is not, people see Gamergate and stuff like that, like, oh, it's terrible. And they don't see like all the time that you were hanging out with like random guys, or like bonding with people at MagFest, or like going into GameStop, which, oh my God, let's see if GameStop is still around in 5 years. But like going into GameStop and just meeting other gamers, just being like, oh yeah, you got that ultimate girl, it was good. Like that is it's a very fun bonding thing too. And I think people get lost in the fact that like there's a lot of online toxicity between like players who aren't there. There's a lot of in-group hostility too. So like, again, like you start getting to the tops of these esports, right? Stuff starts getting super ugly. And that's for men and for women. But there's also a lot of camaraderie and teamwork and fun that happens. I mean, like, Morgan and her experience with the Frag Dolls, like that's one of those once in a lifetime things. But you don't see too many all female teams. Ubisoft funded them, which it gets to like this. You want to talk about equity, right? Equity is money. Equity is funding. Equity is access to opportunities, right? NBA 2K did the best thing to make an equitable playing field. All the players are getting paid the same amount of money. They're trained in their facilities. Like they had a whole draft. They treated it just like the NBA, which again is an anomaly. And it's part of the structure of the NBA. The NBA is a huge organization. The NBA is not Team Liquid. Like this is a totally different world, right?
Right.
It's been around for much, much longer. But to them, they were like, oh no, this is part of our family now. This is, you are training in our facilities. You are doing all these things. You can be proud. You can tell your parents. Be proud. I can tell you how many guys were crying at the draft. Got the little draft hats on. This is for my mom. I know she oh, this is you. You didn't know. Like all these hours, it paid off. Like that's an amazing thing to watch, and to see that like for their parents, they could see a clear like path from like here to here to here, where it's like, all right, well, I didn't understand it, but there he is, and now like he's shining, and now there's finally a woman who's she's shining, right? So there's more that could happen, and there's more that potentially could happen. But the NBA is creating a very specific type of ecosystem around their gaming platforms and their gaming products, alongside the teams, along with those resources that's not happening in other parts of esports, just because they don't have that type of structure or infrastructure set up yet. And so when you see these things like exploding, you see like these kids burning out, these kids with the mental health issues, you see even just understanding like strain, right? And repetitive injuries, right? And like, again, it's something that pro ball, they know all about. Pro sports, they know all about. And they can figure out, like, sometimes, yeah, they push players too far. But in esports, that's still, I remember when Jacob Wolf at ESPN, I think he wrote a piece about the first ever, like, thumb injury that was going to take a sports player out. And again, like, a lot of people treat it as a joke, like, oh my God, a thumb injury, it's death. But it's like, yeah, would you say that about, like, a quarterback?
Right.
Yes. It's the same thing. Like, your career's over. Sorry. Like, there's a lot of stuff that's not going to come back. And so I think we're just too nascent in the world of esports to really understand how it's going to develop. I mean, this could all like collapse, honestly, too, in like 10 years. Like, there's a lot
Don't say that. No, well, because I say don't say that because
that could take this out before it goes. And it doesn't mean that it won't resurge or rebirth. I mean, same thing with like WWE. Same thing with other sports dynasties. Like, they come and they have like a bankruptcy period, right, where everything's effed up and they got lawsuits and whatever. And then they kind of climb back out of it and they're fine. But it's like there's some patterns of growth to these industries that like spike and fall, spike and fall, spike and fall. So it's like, everybody who loves esports is like, oh my God, it can't ever, this won't happen. But we're like, if you look at it, it's a little untenable as it sits. Doesn't mean that it can't come back. Doesn't mean that like somebody can't improve it. But it normally takes a crash. And you see that in pro sports too. It normally takes a crash lawsuits, other stuff happening, and then it rebuilds into something that is actually sustainable.
Well, I was worried when I was worried that we were on a bubble, an esports bubble, when Mike Tyson got in, and I was like, oh, I just started rolling my eyes, really worried at that point when I heard that Iron Mike. But the perspective from the educator. So what we're trying to do with esports is very different than what professional is trying to do, obviously. So in my mind, my goals are, I have five reasons why we're doing esports in education. Number one, we want to redefine athletic culture. I really believe that athletic culture in schools needs to change because it's not inclusive enough. It doesn't get at what everybody wants to have. And I think athletic director really is a misnomer anymore. I feel like it more like the person who is your athletic director should be more like your activities director, the person who oversees something for everybody. We want to diversify opportunities for student participation. So we don't want to just have kids who are pigeonholed into doing one thing. You look at me, I'm 6'2", and when I was in high school, I was 300 pounds. I was pigeonholed into playing football and throwing shot put and discus because that's what I could do. If you had come to me and said, hey, we're going to give you the opportunity to participate and be competitive, at the same time, we're going to teach you how, we're going to do specific training, specific practice. You're going to have a positive adult mentor. I would have given up my football helmet in a heartbeat and gone and played video games. I mean, that's just what I love. Even though I'm terrible. I'm really bad at games in general. But we've got the collegiate scholarship pathways, which we want to connect our kids into. We want to get kids into good opportunities to develop good mental and physical health. So, the gaming culture has a stereotype of the skinny little white kid sitting in the basement eating Doritos and drinking Mountain Dews. And really what we want to do is change that, because we know that in where I live in Racine County, we have 60% of our adult population have had at least one adverse childhood experience, which means that they're probably passing that down into their kids. We've got generational adverse childhood experiences. And the two ways that you push against an adverse childhood experience, number one is with a positive adult interaction, and the other one is through play. And we really, in education, especially in the last 20 years, we have done a horrible job honoring play. We've gotten so caught up in things like No Child Left Behind and test scores and high stakes testing. I mean, you drive by an elementary school, the playground equipment is falling apart, or if there is any even there. And if you see the kids, they're out there at lunchtime and that's it. These fifth graders are going home with hours of homework, which we know statistically homework really doesn't do anything to move the needle. In fact, it's a behavioral thing. It's not going to necessarily push the educational boundaries. And the kids who don't have good supports at home don't turn the homework in. They're getting poor grades because of it. They're getting then turned into pushed towards other things like special education and Adderall and things like that. So with esports, I see us as the opportunity for us to once again honor the importance of play, because there are so many kids as gamers. So with all of that said, the big question is, what can we do? Given the current state that you just described, what can we as educators do maybe to help create a more diverse, eventually get to the equity question, culture of esports in the United States? What can we do to really change that?
One, I think the biggest thing is just active interest. I mean, like, you guys are touching the lives of kids immediately, and they're getting so many messages about like who they are, who they're supposed to be, how they're supposed to perform. That level of encouragement of, oh, are you interested in this? Are you interested in this game? Would you like it? Come on, just try it with me. Just play. It's fine. Like, you don't underestimate how huge that is. Clara, what's Clara's last name? She's in my Girl Gamers documentary. She's the last scene, because I went to one of the game awards. I feel like it was not, I think it was IndieCade East. And Clara is one of the chairs, right? I'll get her full name after the podcast. She was one of the chairs. And she had saw something that was totally disturbing to her while she was there, where there was a girl, I mean, IndieCade, it's an independent games festival. It's made for everyone. It's supposed to be fun. It's at the Museum of Play, the Museum of the Moving Image, rather, in New York. And, like, they try to make it accessible to all ages, all types, all tastes. So, like, just kind of come here, do your thing, be yourself. And she said she saw a little girl kind of like trying to play, and her father kind of pushing her away, like, no, it's not for you. No, no, no. And Clara was like crying, and she was like, look, just let her play. Let her play, right? People don't realize like how much discouragement is out there in the universe for kids who want to play, and who feel like something's wrong with it, or they're ashamed, or the gaming culture is a problem, or it's never going to lead to anything. And so they never feel as though they're encouraged in that part. They have to be alone, or they're only encouraged by other games they find online or other people that are like them. And so, one, creating that kind of like warmer space that allows people to come and try and fail and has what feels like no stakes is great. I mean, like, some of the kids are probably not going to go pro, but they might decide to do something else, just like Betsy's kids, right? Like, a lot of them weren't thinking about gaming as a career, and they started glitch game testers, and they were doing games for Cartoon Network, and they could see what their work was of. And some of them have started in the industry. Some of them started their own company together. And not all of them went into gaming, but a lot of them see that as the glue that helped to keep them together. She says that group is still going with the kids because the support they formed as glitch game testers allowed them to be strong when they were in computer science. And they were in, again, environments that were not favorable to them, environments that were hostile. Two, a lot of it is also assuming, like checking assumptions around like who should be playing and who shouldn't. You see this a lot in computer science education too, and there's been a lot more written about that than in gaming culture. But you see a lot of similarities and overlap of kind of like, who are you talking to in the room, right? Are you making sure everybody feels included in these types of conversations? Or just like in computer science classrooms, are you skewing to the highest level person as your default and leaving everybody else behind?
Right.
That's a big question, I think, for educators to really grapple with, because the classroom environment where, like so many gamers, so many game developers look at these classic games like Oregon Trail, Number Crunchers. Like, this is old crap that you play in the classroom.
Hey, Oregon Trail. Just give me what, 4 oxen and all the bullets $200 will get me. That's
right.
That's all.
Right. I'm not dying of dysentery. I don't know. Like, we're not going out. But like, these things, again, these were sites of like joyous play, right? That imprinted on people so long that like entire careers were launched because it was like, yeah, I'm in 4th grade and playing Oregon Trail. I got to like figure out what this whole new thing is. And I mean, there's a lot of transformative power in that we don't see. And then also too, for gaming, like as you said before, in terms of like looking at stress and looking at adverse childhood trauma, a significant interest of mine is healing through technology, right? And when you look at games like Tetris treating PTSD, again, it's not designed for that. And you look at like what social commentary games like Papers, Please, or like Limb, or like, other games.
Papers, Please is one of my favorite games.
I cite that all the time. People who are outside of games, and I'm like, you play as a bureaucrat, right? But the entire idea is that, do you resist a system? Are you upholding a system? And video games are amazing. I mean, I always tell people my whole thing is, I think I learned more about history from playing Age of Empires than from like all that I learned in modern world history, because there it was about strategy, right? Like, all these different civilizations are there, and of course you have criticism of how it's slanted. Same criticism, honestly, of like Jared Diamond's work, right? Guns, Germs, and Steel, right?
Oh yes.
Criticisms of like of Age of Empires, the Conqueror's expansion. But for me, it was like, 1, I learned how to pronounce Tenochtitlan. 1, did not learn that from history class. 2, you have to strategize actively to try to win this game. So it's like, yeah, like we know how history played out, but given like these resources, this type of civilization, this type of thing, what do I need to do? Do I need to build up my university really fast so we can get to like gunpowder? Do I need to work with the land? What do I need to be doing? And it really shows that, again, a lot of historical events hinge on a few factors. It's not set in stone. It wasn't like this really warped understanding of history people are getting, or it's like, oh, well, you were conquered, and that's like, I think that just popped up in the news recently. You were conquered, we won, you lost. No. History is complex, and when you have to play through that, when you have to build your civilization from scratch, you really see that in a way that skimming through a history book is not going to teach you. So I mean, like, there's a lot of ways in which I think educators can come in and say, we're going to do this. The other piece too is about that sportsmanship aspect to it, right? Because again, it's like it was weird when I was doing the Girl Gamers documentary. The producer that was assigned to like wing me, it was my first ever documentary. I didn't know anything. And she was just like, Latoya, like, we got to get out of here. Like, before these guys know what we're doing, they might try to like beat us up or fight us. I'm like, that is not how gamers work, right? And I was in, I was shooting in JL games for one of the scenes. And like, there were a bunch of guys hanging out, definitely. And some of them were paying attention to what we were doing. And when at the end they walked up and they were like, oh my God, my sister plays. I'm so glad to see like more representation. Like, glad that you're doing what you're doing. So glad that you're like representing. Like, there's a lot of warmth that's also here that doesn't really get, I think, the kind of understanding and camaraderie and play, and that people who create that, right? So like, for every like jerk guy who's like screaming through the headset trying to like throw you off your game by saying something that's racist or sexist, right? There's also probably like the person that you're like playing with, or the person that'll run levels with you, or like, people like Pat who will be like, oh, do you want to stop being a button masher? Let me teach you the art of fighting games here. Let me help you out. Like there's always somebody else. And I think that educators can create a space where it's like, hey, look, when we were playing in high school, like we had these standards. This was tourney. This is how we do it. We don't play dirty here. And if there's enough kids coming through these systems where they're like, oh, we don't want to play dirty. Like that's not how we get down over here. We're doing this, right? It will start to also change the culture. Because again, the culture is made of people. And if everybody's playing in isolation or people are playing and they're just kind of like working toward shock value or trying to like impress their friends or trying to impress the people online because they're streaming and they need to get views and need to get subscribers, then yeah, you're going to incentivize certain types of behavior, right? In the same way that like female streamers, again, more stuff that needs to get researched and written about. Female streamers, way more pressure to be sexualized.
Oh yeah.
Than male streamers. And it's such a no-brainer, right? It's the underpinning of our society. Sex sells, right? But think about what's that doing to a 14-year-old girl. I'm really good at this game, but I'm not going to get as many subs if I don't show some boobs. I'm not going to get as many subs if I'm not like sexual. But if I'm too sexual, I might get stalkers. If I'm too sexual, like men will get angry. If I'm too sexual, I'll lose subscribers. That is a lot to be going through for your like side income. Because a lot of these kids, this is like a side job. This is not, these aren't inconsequential things anymore. There's a lot of ways for like kids to get famous. And there's also that poor kid that just killed himself. Atika, the YouTuber.
Yes.
He just found his body. Like that was all over Hollywood Reporter, everything. Because again, like there's so much that's happening with these kids in these spaces. And as they grow up, it's like, what are the stakes for you? What is going on? And like having something to ground them, something to root them. Another experience, it's like, it's actually not all this, it can be this. Like it's one of the reasons I've stayed in gaming. I love it, but I've also had a lifetime of really heavy positive experiences that can't be taken away from me now that I'm in my 30s and some jerk on the internet's trying to come at me. Like there's too much built up there, right?
The data I collected, I did a survey of our scholar, I call them scholar gamers, at the end of our season. And what a lot of their feedback was, it was about their experience. It was about their feelings of inclusion in the program and what their best memories were, right? So I did some qualitative and some quantitative data. And some of the qualitative data things that I got back was when we went to A&W after our tournament, or I made friends from other schools that I had never met before. None of it, very few of it was this time when I did this in this game and we won this thing. There was almost none of that. It was all about the social connection. It was all about the fabric. It was all about finding their tribe. Like we took these kids out of their homes, gave them a space where we put 3 high schools together in the same space where everybody said, that's a crazy idea. Don't do that because you're going to have problems. And on the day one, what we had was we had 2 of the high schools competing against each other just in some practice scrims. One of the high schools was watching and cheering on both sides, which to me was like, I was worried and I'm like, okay, this is going to be fine. This was a space that we created for kids where they weren't being told, because in gaming culture, the stereotypes are so strong. We have had a history of teachers telling kids, for example, a teacher would never tell a kid, you play your instrument too much, that's a waste of time. You draw too much, that's a waste of time. You read too much, that's a waste of time. You play too much basketball, it's a waste of time. No. But when it comes to video games, for some reason, that's a waste of time. And it's something that kids so intrinsically love. I mean, imagine being told almost daily that what you intrinsically love to do is a waste of time. That's got to be damaging to a lot of these kids. And there's got to be a sense of them when they, like you just talked about the streamers, and I was thinking about, there's got to be a sense in some of them, like, I'm going to prove you wrong. Like, I'm going to show you that it is. And that's when you start talking about burnout and like the mental toll that takes, because they have to perform at a certain level and they're putting that pressure on themselves. Again, they're not doing it for the joy, the intrinsicness. Now it's the extrinsic motivation of likes and hits and comments and feedback. And it just becomes this ugly cycle, I guess is what I'm hearing you say. Did that sound about?
Yeah. And I mean, it's also too, like it's very difficult, I think, for some parents to understand. And like I said, like I feel like I'm in a very weird space. I'm very public about it. But also, like, I had another job before this, right? Like I was a journalist and a host, stuff like that. So like people are like, oh, it's always like normal, but is also this gamer. Like I just actually yesterday, I was on my friend Anya's podcast. So Anya wrote this book called The Art of Screen Time. It's about like parenting. And so she came and interviewed me and my family and was talking about like what happens when you're like a gamer parent, right? Like, do you ban kids from video games? No. I play, right? So at this point, the way I look at screen time apparently is just totally different than the way that somebody else might look at it, like to me. And then so my other friends who are parents are like, oh, like my kid is telling me that he doesn't want to study because he's going to drop out and be an esports pro. And I'm like, well, look, let's talk about like what this actually means, right? Like it's not, so, you know, tell him no, he has to go back to doing his homework. It's not going to fly. 18 months, kid. Like it's a brutal, brutal world. That said, if you want to be a pro, like it's about this, this, and this, and putting in your hours, and it might be 17 hours like a day sometimes. Like that's just what it is. Just like peak football players and kids who play in college, like it's very similar. Rick Fox actually has a really, really interesting take on this. He got into esports because of his kid. And he's going from being an athlete to, you know, managing an esports team, and where he sees the similarities. Because a lot of times too, it's like, oh, that's not a real sport. It's not a real thing. Like let Rick Fox yell for a minute. Let him. It's way better than I can. He's got cred because he was in the NBA. But I mean, for me, like, you know, my son is 5. He's been gaming since he was 2. And it's a very tricky thing as a parent to navigate, because you're also going like, my kid loves this thing, but he also loves this thing partially because I'm doing it. So, you know, how much am I letting him do it then versus like how much do I want him to have like a normal childhood? Like, like my son plays piano and he plays soccer and he does Bollywood dancing classes and he does all these different things, but he also games very heavily, right? To the point where I'm like, okay, do you need your own separate system, because you can't just always hog like everything that I'm on, like mommy would like to use the Switch at some point. And it's like, but that shift is hard, especially if it's not like something that you've done in your bones. If you're a football parent and you're playing all the time, your kid is going to be 3 years old out there catching stuff, like running. And you see those sports parent stories, like they were all over ESPN. Gaming is having a similar come up. It's just people are just less comfortable with it because it's been demonized for so long. It's been such a like, ooh, scary monster in the corner, and not like this is a thing that your kid loves.
Well, it's the answer to our societal ills.
Yeah. To me, it's always like gaming is just like any other form of media. I said this on Anya's podcast too. I need to actually share that because it just went out yesterday. But I was like, gaming is another form of media, man. It's just like your kids watching movies or whatever. But instead of a movie, which is 2 hours, and instead of a book, which might be like 6 to 8 hours, like a game is going to be 10 to 40 hours of their life. You should know what they're doing. You should talk to them about it. You should be sitting there with them and understanding it, even if it's not really your thing. And also, you'd be surprised at how many people go, this is not my thing, except I was hanging out playing Animal Crossing and my mom got in, and all of a sudden, like, a thing went crazy. Like, those are gaming stories, right? I was playing Grand Theft Auto. My mom doesn't care for this part, but she also loves the card tricks, so we're all going to play together. Like, this is, and as there's more of us, so like I actually linked Anya to Morgan's page, because Morgan's like, my son started to teach himself Smash Ultimate and is mimicking victory dances and trash talking to characters on screen. She goes, had nothing to do with this. She's like, I'm kind of amazed and horrified at the same time, and it's like.
But the kids are feeling a sense of, this is, to me, is because people say, well, that's addiction. Your kids are addicted. And I say, they're not addicted. I said, what they're feeling is classic self-determination theory. They're feeling a sense of relatedness. They're feeling a sense of competency, and they're feeling a sense of autonomy because they're able to do this on their, and they can get successful at it by practice. They see their progress. They see it right away. They're not, and people go, well, why aren't they feeling that in schools? I'm like, they don't feel related to what they're learning in schools. They're being told what to do, when to do it, how to do it. And they are, the competency part, I mean, my God, if you're told every day you have to work this, and this, and you don't see the growth because the next thing's coming or you're behind, of course kids are going to check out of school. So esports becomes like this whole thing where we can reconnect, in my mind, we can reconnect kids, not just into school, because if we focus on the gaming, we lose out on the big opportunity here to connect these kids intrinsically. So present to them the whole ecosystem. Hey, let's talk about your marketing. How are you branding yourself? I mean, when was the last time you heard of a high school that says to a 14-year-old, hey, I understand you're starting to do some streaming. Let's work on your branding. Let me teach you or talk to you about how do you present yourself online and the ramifications that can have for your future. You know, even my crazy idea is, you know, if Harry Potter can have Hogwarts, why can't I have a school designed and built around an esports lifestyle? That is where kids are. They may not become pro gamers later on in life, but the skills that they learn, the social media, the marketing, the entrepreneurship, the coaching, the data analysis, the growth mindset of purposeful practice every day of looking at what you got to do in order to get better. Why do we not have that Hogwarts of esports yet? That's as an educator, that's the kind of thing I'm going like, you want to get me excited about school? There we go.
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, there's a college, I think, in Scandinavia I learned about last year at GDC, where I was like, oh, it's an esports college? It's interesting. And some of the Eastern European countries have like esports programs in their colleges, like as an official track, but not as early as like high school. Which again, I think your argument is smart. Like that's where it should start, right? Because these kids are already playing; they've been playing for many years by the time they're in college.
Right.
And the whole idea too was like, I think also understanding like the underlying, like people say sports get women into the C-suite, right? A lot of women CEOs are also people who played sports because you learn sportsmanship, you learn resiliency, you learn how to fight back, you learn how to like face challenges, you learn how to lose, like you learn how to stand up for yourself, be aggressive, like all that stuff comes from sports. You could also argue that a lot of that comes from video games, right? Like right now, my son is, he's 5.5, and we're working on understanding resiliency. So you didn't beat that boss the first time, and it's frustrating, but you don't need to start the game over. We're not going to just quit and do something else. You just take a little bit of time, think about your approach, and try again, right? And that's been big for him, right? Because for him, he's like, oh, I'm frustrated, I want to stop, right? And we're going, no, this is what resiliency is, right? Because the fun thing is the game is designed to be beaten. You can win. You have to figure out the way to win. And I feel like a lot of times school feels very nebulous, right? Like, again, as a dropout myself, school feel like a lot of things that are not about your life and not about winning at all, right? There's not a clear path sometimes of like, what am I doing? It's just like, where am I trying to go? But in gaming, like there's normally a way that you're supposed to be able to do it. And it's about finding it and figuring out those pieces of gaming that you take as part of your life, right? Those friendship bonds, right? So you were saying like, your students and like what they loved and all the experience of like going out afterward, right? A lot of people are in online games because they're looking for community, because they're looking for fun. Like one of my closest friends, I met her on Friendster, looking for other girls who were into video games back in like 1999, which is again, Friendster, that's how old that is.
Right.
And two, like she still routinely will go and like fly to like clan meetups for, COD and stuff like that. Cause she's not a pro player, but she's heavy in the scene. She likes to do it. And, she hangs out with her clan. They have little retreats in Atlanta and stuff. She'll go fly to those. And I'm like, this is like, we are 35. This is camaraderie. This is kinship. These are people you were spending 4 hours of the day solving problems, hanging out, decompressing from work. Like there's bonds that are very, very deep there. And then there's also the bonds of storytelling and character, right? Oh, yeah. Games are these beautiful epic stories and like, experiencing those things. Like I was bonding with somebody else, at a conference, we were talking about Eternal Darkness and Fatal Frame. And like these horror games, which is like, oh my God, like that story was so good, Shenmue, oh my God, that story. Like, again, these are games that are 20 years old now, but we both played them and we both like, but can we talk about this moment though? Because I'm still not over it. It's been 20 years. And it's like the way that you would bond over foreign films or things like that. Gaming can be this too. It's just, you got to just let it be what it is.
People who played Resident Evil 2 in the dark with the light, with the sound up, God bless you. Because that game was one of the first really frightening games for me.
I'm not a horror person. Again, like this is how deep my love goes. I hate horror. I hate horror movies, I hate horror games, but I will go see Jordan Peele and I will go play a really good game. Friends say it. Yeah. Resident Evil like almost took my heart out with 0, and I was like, I can't. No, I'm over this game series. I can't. Sounds great. Keep me posted. I'll read the spoilers. I cannot deal with this game like from an emotional level. Right. My heart is going to chest. I'm going to die. So like that's the feeling that we have. But again, like understanding why so many kids love this, why, like, the Wall Street Journal has a great article about like why it's not exactly obsession. It's more like that feeling of completion and satisfaction. It's just like, your kid doesn't want to stop playing, but why? And I love that article because it really goes like, look, like they don't feel like the mission is done. They don't feel like they're complete. So yeah, they're going to start screaming as if you took a chocolate cake out of their mouth mid-bite, right? They were like, you have to figure out ways that make sense, particularly with the flow of a game. So if you're playing something like, Lego Marvel Superheroes, my son loves to play, right?
I love Lego. Any of the Lego games, I'm on it. Love them.
So into Lego Marvel Superheroes, like he's all about it. So like if he's playing that, then like there's save points every 5 minutes, and it's not a big deal. Just like power it down. Whereas like when we were playing Kingdom Hearts together, so we were playing Kingdom Hearts 3 together. We're still playing that technically because we're going at his speed, not my speed. So we are, yeah. So I was like, I would have beat this game, but I'm like, nope. Gavin wants to run in a circle for like 15 minutes. We're gonna stay in this world forever because he will not move. But okay, like this is me being a parent. Like, okay, you're gonna have to learn this yourself. You're running out of time, but okay. But Kingdom Hearts, and like he was like actively distressed when we were in the Monsters Inc. world because he felt like he hadn't saved Boo. Like it was his personal mission to do it, and I had to like keep explaining like Boo is gonna wait until we get back. Like she's not gonna die. She's not gonna be gone. Like, she's going to wait because we're playing a game. It's not real. Like, we had to go just do that in a while. But it's because he was so invested in, like, the story and the characters that, like, he was like, oh, no, like, it's my job to save this person, and I got to go. Like, Mom, why would you cut me off from saving this person? It's important. So I think it's understanding those motivations, too, and, like, really playing to the hero side, I think, of gaming, to the villain side. Villains get a lot of play. Villains get a lot of press. There's a lot of heroes, too. And looking at who they are.
Well, to kind of wrap things up here, just two other little questions, I guess, though we could go on probably for another couple hours. If we didn't change anything, like if we didn't begin to address the lack of diversity, let's say, in esports culture, what is a long-term ramification that you see as a result, potentially?
We have the same culture that you have in technology, where you have essentially like a tech upper class of people being able to master this, and then everybody else is kind of scraping along, and a lot of shrugging. There's not a lot of idea of like, oh, we could have fixed this at some point. No. It's impossible for us to do it, and we're just going to let it take over the world. It's the same problems that we're seeing with like the lack of diversity in technology, leading to these unintended consequences in artificial intelligence and sensor technology and the types of technologies that roll out, even in data and privacy. We'll see that same stuff in the gaming ecosystem. It'll manifest differently. But again, having any kind of non-diverse, like closed, homogenous ecosystem is ultimately bad, right? Our lives require diversity, right? Plants ecosystems require diversity into a system. Human ecosystems require diversity at some point. If not, you start having birth defects. Like, there is a reason why we're supposed to be in communities that are different from ourselves. So the idea is, like, how do you get there without it becoming like this ridiculous collapse? The other problem too is that, again, you don't really learn new things if you're in a homogenous space, right? And esports needs a lot of talent to grow right now. There's a lot of stuff that has to change. There's a lot of stuff to get fixed. There's a lot of stuff that has to get built. There's infrastructure nobody's ever seen before. You can't tell me that you need the best and the brightest to build this new ecosystem, and you're fine with the best and brightest only being white and Asian.
Yeah.
And then one of the common criticisms I got to the article, which is well met, is that they were like, well, what about teams from Brazil? What about teams from other countries? But those countries have different broadband infrastructure. So again, like, esports questions are really society questions a lot of times. And like this, you want to talk about equity, right? Broadband. Do you have access? We don't have a PC bond culture. We don't have a cyber cafe culture where you can be broke and then just rent a computer by the hour and just go do it. Like, you cannot go to FedEx office and
and play games
and be a pro gamer. That's just not. That is an obscene amount of money that you would be spending. You can't even go print without it being $20. Like, it's not. That is sustainable in the way that it is in like South Korea and Brazil and other places where they have a different type of structure and economy for their broadband ecosystem. So again, the United States looks at esports as an economy, and they've been doing that since, again, remember, EverQuest. They've been calculating esports economies since EverQuest. If we look at the GDP, if we look at the money that's being left on the table, the digital divide, the access gap, all those things are playing a role in how esports is shaping up. Right? You can't just say it's racist gamers. It's also racist structures that are in the United States. So that has to be fixed too. And when you look at that, when you try to launch like an esports league in a high school, you'll start seeing real quick the barriers in the same way that you're seeing the professionalization of league sports be a barrier for kids for lower income communities, right? Soccer around the world is a cheap sport to play. All you need is a ball, and the kids will make it work. In the United States, it's a whole other kind of thing where it's organized leagues, money. It's a very expensive sport. Why? See that same kind of parallel with esports, right? We see that same. Does it have to be as expensive as it is? Do we have people that it does, or could we structure our communities differently to encourage this? Does your school have open computer labs, or are they only closed to certain hours unless you have some other thing to it? A lot of schools in low-income areas, many of which I volunteered at, a lot of schools in low-income areas, those computer labs are locked unless they're with a teacher with structured supervised learning for 45 minutes. They don't have access to that. They don't have access to machinery after school. They don't have access to it at all. That's an easy change. But again, it requires thinking about the system very differently.
Absolutely. And to leave us, I guess, on a little higher note, these are all what you're saying is, and I see it every day too in my own community of Racine, Wisconsin too, exactly what you're talking about. But since you published the article back in March of 2018, have there been any improvements you have started to see? Is anything changed? So we're almost 1 year and 3 months now. in that 1 year and 3 months, because I mean, esports has been exploding all over all over the place. Is there a change? Have you seen positive changes, improvements?
There's one personal story, I think, and then there's an overall kind of, but not really. Like, it's the same rate of change as I think tech companies, where it's like, maybe one company was like, you know what, I'm inspired and I read this and I think I'm gonna fix it. The thing that I got the most out of that article, so it was very interesting to see how many people wanted to engage around it. We're very curious about it. The people who trashed it. That's just what it was. Everybody stayed respectful in their own spaces. I'm cool with that. Like, disagree with me, feel free.
Mm-hmm.
Go for it. It's a free country, honey. Just keep that shit online. It's all good. Everybody did. I'm all good with that. But I got a DM. It's interesting. I was actually going to see Ready Player One. It's really hilarious. I was going into the theater, and I got a DM from Terrence. But Terrence, I didn't actually interview for that article. I just wrote about what happened to him. And I sent a DM, and he goes, "Thank you for writing that article. After you publicized what happened to me, I was signed at a much better deal, and I can keep playing."
Wow.
And I went, "Damn, that is." Later, the guy who signed Terrence reached out to me to report on something else and was like, "Hey, I saw your article, and that's why I reached out to Terrence, because I was like, this shouldn't have happened, and I can change it because I own a team," right? And I was like, To me, that was the best payoff that I could have gotten from that article. I don't care what else happened, right? Mm-hmm. What happened to Terrence was an injustice. That was wrong, right? It wasn't that he wasn't good. It wasn't the meritocracy argument. He came in second. DreamHack was embarrassed. Like, they had to do all these other things, and he still wasn't signed. It just wasn't like, why? There was no explanation for what happened to him. And as a result of publicizing it, he got a much better deal. He was able to keep playing. Because for me, the big loss is all the talent that's not playing. Mm-hmm. Because they can't keep going. They can't maintain. There was another guy that I interviewed at EFOM. His name's escaping me right now. He was so talented. He was like, he was so talented, fighting games player. But he was talking about the pressure he was under with his family, right? And like, he's like, I got to go back. Like, my family has a family, like a small pharmacy. I'm going to have to take it over at some point. Like, I love this. This is my dream. But, at some point I got to go. Like, maybe he only had another year or so in him to try to compete before other responsibilities are going to take over. And it's like, okay, like, sometimes that's the breaks, it's life. But it's like, how much poorer would we be if it wasn't for these types of interventions, right? Like, there's a great piece that we published on Undefeated that did not get enough acclaim, and it was all about whether or not there'll be another Allen Iverson, right? And it was because they were talking about D1 sports has become so calibrated toward like student successes and outcomes that what they ended up seeing was that they're now trying to surface kids who are coming from like 2-parent homes, very stable, will be successful in college. And as a result, it means the kids like Allen Iverson, who probably wouldn't have ever been selected for a college or whatever, would have never had a college experience. It was called The Gentrification of D1 Sports, and it was super good. Steve Reese edited that one. I felt like it was one of the best pieces that did not get enough attention that we ever published on Undefeated. But again, like, you can see that divide starting in traditional sports, and you'll see that divide emerge in esports if we're not careful.
Wow. Well, Latoya, thank you so much. I mean, we talked. I could go on for quite a while.
Yeah, it's an interesting space. I mean, feel free if you want to like follow up a couple of years and see what's going on.
I'm happy to go down the rabbit hole some more. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate everything that you shared with us today. It was incredibly meaningful, and I hope as educators, if you're listening to Latoya, how can they best reach out to you if they have additional questions or follow up?
So I'm in the middle of launching this game studio, so I'm a little bit nuts. But if you hit @Latoya Peterson on Twitter, I generally respond. I'm not like proactive these days, but I will. If you do hit my tag, I'm like, oh, it's on my phone. I see it, and I'm like, okay, I'll be there. Like, that's probably the best way to reach me if I don't know you. @Latoya Peterson on Twitter.
And I'm going to try to get, because you referenced a lot of articles, a lot of books, a lot of things.
I'll try to see a list too, because I mean, I've been collecting these over the years because like it's useful and it keeps coming back. I'm like, oh, we still haven't solved this issue. So let's look at this research from 90 and this research from 2014, and then we'll just keep going.
Perfect. Latoya Peterson, thank you again.
All right. Thanks, James. Appreciate it.
That will do it for this week on the Academy of Esports. I've been your host, James O'Hagan. Esports are organized competitive video games allowing schools to redefine their athletic culture, diversify opportunities for student participation, promote good physical and mental health, increase collegiate scholarship pathways, and play games. We can never forget the importance of play. The mission of the Academy of Esports is to support these ideals. The vision of the Academy of Esports is for all students to experience the fun and joy of playing competitive video games. You may follow me on Twitter at Jim O'Hagan. That's at JIMOHAGAN, and through the Academy of Esports account at TAO Esports. It's a great way to get the latest blog posts, podcast episodes, and news coming out of esports and education. And remember, you can continue your engagement by going to www.taoesports.com. You can also connect through Facebook at www.facebook.com/TAOesports. Thanks again for listening, and I look forward to our time again next week.